pick with a very interesting decision. I don't know if they're going to do this, but here's what he says. Number 16, Seahawks. J.J. McCarthy, quarterback out of Michigan.
Interesting.
He says, okay, here's a spot for the next quarterback. While I don't have a first-round grade on him right now, a lot can change before round 1 on April 25th. He does have first-round arm talent, along with the ability to beat defenses with his legs. He's the type of quarterback teams will take a shot at in the middle of the first round, especially when you consider he just turned 21 a few days ago. That is kind of an interesting point. Mm-hmm. He rarely turns the ball over through 44 touchdown passes, 9 picks over the past 2 seasons, and can make every throw. McCarthy just wasn't asked to beat teams with his arm for the Wolverines because they so often dominated the line of scrimmage. As of now, I'm betting on a team seeing his upside and trying to take him somewhere in the teens. For Seattle, the contract Geno Smith signed last March made it clear the team could get out after 1 season. Smith had a decent year, but will he really be here long term? I could see the Seahawks severing ties and starting fresh for whomever the new coach ends up being.
Yeah. I think, well, if you would have told me that before the year, I told you, man, one of the guys to watch over this season, not named Caleb Williams or Drake May or these guys at the top, was J.J. And he's an unbelievable winner. And we want to talk about, all of the X's and O's, the arm talent, where does that fit with a quarterback, kind of like this head coaching conversation, what's really most important. I'm starting to lean as I get older in life, and I don't know if that's just watching these stories over and over and over and over again for 17 years on the college football road. I don't know if it's because Titus wants to, he thinks, and aspires to be a QB, that so much of it to me is actually the human being and not the arm. So much of it is actually the same quality that you're looking for out of your head coach to lead people. How you present to your teammates, how much you love your teammates, how much they love you, how much you're just willing to battle and go through and just handle everything that gets dumped on you. And the dude was the one to turn it around with Jim. For 7 years at Michigan, they waited. And the story was, man, Jim can't find his quarterback. Jim doesn't have his quarterback. Jim doesn't have his Andrew Luck. Jim doesn't have his guy. He needs the QB in his system. And here comes J.J. McCarthy and goes, 26-1, 27-1?
They just seem so similar, right? Remember we played the sound of him after the championship game or beforehand talking about the rows between his teeth and all the – they seem very weird and very similar.
He's kind of quirky. He's kind of different. If you asked Allison, if you asked Benetti, if you asked Bo Garrett, if you asked Darren, if you asked our broadcast team that sits with these players and sits with these coaches and said, hey, which of the QBs was, one of your favorites this year? Who did? J.J. McCarthy's right there. Yeah. And we had Caleb, and we had Penix, and we had Bo Nix, and they all liked in different ways. But J.J.'s just got this, South Chicago hockey player.
Yeah, the problem is just watching him, and I didn't watch him nearly as much as, say, Mel Kiper, it doesn't look like he has first-round arm talent. I appreciate that Mel said that. My quick view of it, and I'm not going to pretend to be a scout, so I'll ask you, Brock, he sure didn't look in the championship game or the Alabama game like a guy with first-round arm talent.
No, he played in those games and many times down the stretch, and this is what I didn't love, and even in person, and Damon said this too, is there was always a little bit of a hesitancy. There was always a little bit of instead of just, Penix throwing people open, right? And guys just anticipating and watching Jared Goff on that 3rd down and 8 in an unbelievably tight window to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that ball is out before he's even thinking of coming out. You never saw that with JJ. But was that because he can't? Or was that because, you know what? I threw 3 picks in one game, and the other 13, I threw 1. And I'm going to take care of the ball, and I'm never going to put it in harm's way because our run game, our defense, and my legs are going to help us win a national title.
It is so hard to make a judgment on what the Seahawks should do with that pick without knowing who the head coach is here and what sort of philosophy and vision they have for the team. But it does dawn on me that he is a better fit with Mike Vrabel or Jim Harbaugh than he would be with some of the other coaching candidates.
Yes, agreed.
Right? That obviously he played for Harbaugh. They made it work together. That's a natural fit. They're very similar. And that Vrabel for years was kind of looking for a guy like him, right? Don't turn it over. You're not going to have to throw it all the time, but when you do, it's going to be important. So I think he's a good fit with either of those guys. The problem is, if either of those guys comes in here, don't you think the first thing they're going to want to do is fix the line of scrimmage?
100%. And you have Geno, and Geno is more than capable of doing all of those things as well.
Yeah, and as much as I would like a quarterback, And I would love Michael Penix. I do think he'd be a heck of a quarterback. It is hard for me to say, based on the roster, based on what we're seeing in the playoffs, et cetera, that J.J. McCarthy would be a better pick than some of the guys that come after him in this mock draft, including Fautanu, who is number 21 to the Dolphins in this draft, including Jared Verse, defensive end out of Florida State, who he has going 19 to the Rams. I've seen other drafts where he's like number 10. And including some of the other guys on the defensive line, Brock, that we've talked about, the dudes from Texas, et cetera. So
no, you need line of scrimmage. You just buried in the story. Like, this got to be a line of scrimmage game. You weren't good enough. If in 2010 you got bludgeoned in Pittsburgh and it was a bloodbath and that can't ever happen again, you got bludgeoned just the same way in Baltimore on the Eastern Seaboard this year. When you actually go back and look at the season, as I did yesterday, kind of reflecting back on these line of scrimmage games and these 100-yard rushers and these teams that just absolutely punctured you and you could not sustain. And oh, by the way, where do you think the Seahawks rank as far as cap space? If you looked at some of these numbers lately, they're like 25th in the league. Like, it's not as if they're sitting there with $70 million.
But how does that change if and when they make some decisions on these guys?
And they will have to make some decisions on these guys. The Quandres and the Jamals, and they have to, because there's also the Leonard Williams and some of your line of scrimmage pieces that you have to get back and signed, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't think this is the time for that quarterback. I understand the premise. I understand, it would be great to get a young first-round quarterback that you really do like,
so
then you can build around.
I really want them to draft a quarterback.
Yeah.
But it's really hard for me to say that either McCarthy or even Penix at that spot would have more value for them right now than somebody on the line. Now, if you were in a different situation where you had the chance at one of the top 3 guys in this draft, maybe that'd be a little different, right? I mean, maybe if you had the opportunity to get a Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams, like, maybe at that point it gets different. Yeah. But it'd be pretty hard for me right now, just kind of with where their line of scrimmage is at, to make that recommendation.
I would tend to agree.
All right. Well, so you're still on the Troy Fautanu train.
He's my guy. He's been my guy all season long. And, it's not just my guy. He's the conference guy. Those peers, those teammates. I'm going to go back and take a look at the Morris Trophy, which is sadly also one of those things that, like many things in the Pac-12, is going to come to an end. That is the award given down at the WAC every single year and has been for decades. And that's one voted on by the O linemen and the D linemen in the conference.
Oh, yeah, that's the best line of scrimmage, right? It gives it to both.
That's all the D linemen voting on the best O lineman, all the O linemen voting on the best D lineman, and they get celebrated and they get awarded that, and that was Troy, and there was no question about it. And that's the kind of guy that I want. That's the kind of guy that this team needs more of. That when you watch the line of scrimmage over this last weekend and you just see the difference in San Francisco and in Detroit, and you watch Penei Sewell and you watch those 3 first-rounders and you listen to the connective tissue that Daniel Jeremiah talks about, that's a connective tissue. They all build at the line of scrimmage out.
Was that the guy that, Jake Dickert said was the best he'd ever seen?
Jake Dickert said Troy Fautanu was the best offensive lineman he has ever
seen on tape,
Ever.
I mean, that's
who I want.
pretty high compliment.